Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, we're getting inside info on trends in food for 2026. From a very heavy hitter, a trained chef turned industry analyst, who major companies rely on for culinary insight. Here's the president of the Menu Matters research firm, Maeve Webster. Maeve, how you doing? Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You know all there is to know about the culinary world.
I try, at the very least.
If you were opening a restaurant today, you've been a line cook, you've worked your way up to sous chef or executive somewhere, now you want to open your own place. What would you open?
Well, that is a really good question. I mean, I think whatever you opened had to minimize the need for skilled staff. You'd need to be very flexible in your service style throughout the day and probably throughout the year. You should be offering foods that are influenced by or reflective of at least some global cuisines to appeal to younger consumers and far more diverse population in the US. And I would say at this point, probably breakfast or dinner is going to be a lot more successful for you than lunch.
Boy, there's a lot to unpack in all of that. The big takeaway for me is our tastes are broadening, our pocketbooks are tightening.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true, particularly right now. Although with a caveat on the pocketbook piece, because we've got an increasingly polarized population economically, where the wealthier population is not having too much trouble being able to afford whatever it is they want and need. But the consumers who are on the lower end are extremely tight with their budgets. And those consumers are the consumers who are powering the largest portion of the food service industry, and that's fast food, and to a more limited degree, fast casual.
But fine dining is not dead?
Not at all. In fact, since the pandemic, fine dining has actually outperformed almost any other segment among restaurants in particular over the last, 5 years. So they have done very, very well. And there are a couple of different reasons for that, though. It's not just because the wealthy consumers in this country are doing fine and have been doing fine for a number of years, but those consumers who have enough money that fine dining is not out of reach, what they're doing is they're dining out less often, but deciding to go to better restaurants when they do dine out. And that is because there have been so many challenges in the food industry with labor, supplies, restaurants being able to be consistent in what they offer, consistent quality food, consistent service, that those consumers who can afford it every once in a while are waiting and then going to fine dining restaurants because the value proposition is better. You know you're going to get great service, or you should, certainly at that segment. You should get great service. The food should be exceptional. So the time and the money you're spending, you are confident you're going to get your money's worth.
I want to get back to that and so much more in the dining world in general, but I want to take a little detour here. You're, I think, somewhat rare as, pardon the term, as an egghead.
Okay.
The old joke, those who can do, those who can't teach.
Right.
You live in the data world, but at one point, you ran a restaurant.
Correct. Yes. For 4 years, my partner and I ran a cafe in Bennington, Vermont. It was a coffee house with sandwiches and soups and a limited menu of baked goods and things of that. So our menu was tight, but we could execute consistently against everything on the menu. We had a pretty broad beverage menu, which is certainly on trend now, and ended up having to shut it down, which was horrible and heartbreaking at the time because the building was bought by developers and they kicked everybody out. But that was 6 months before the pandemic hit.
So you'd have been screwed anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately. Yeah. But no, it was an amazing experience. And I did that, I would say, halfway in the middle of my career, which I think was eye-opening to me because I had gone to culinary school, but had not until that point worked in professional kitchens. The culinary school experience certainly helped my data analysis to a degree. But then once I had been in an operation, running it day to day, and I worked primarily with the kitchen and the menu, my partner handled front of house and accounting. But having to do that day to day, it completely changed my perspective on some of the data I was looking at, the way I was communicating what was happening in the industry, the issues that I knew were going to be important to culinarians, to R&D chefs. It really was probably the best thing I could have done for my career.
What'd you learn?
I learned how difficult it is to run a restaurant. It's no joke. The people who say to themselves, I make a great brownie, why don't I open a bakery? It's amazing that any of them are actually successful for as complicated as it is. And I knew knew that it was an incredibly complicated industry and I knew how challenging it was, but having to do it day to day, it was more challenging than even I could have guessed. And I had at that point 10 years of experience with consulting with chefs. So it was truly eye-opening. And it was also really interesting dealing with consumers and trying to introduce things that were on trend. And that actually changed the way I thought about trends as well. Granted, I'm in Vermont. Granted, it's a more blue-collar town, Bennington, than, some other areas that you can...
Well, hold on. You got a college there?
You do, but the college is very separate. They tend to keep a bit more to themselves, although we did get college students. So we had that diversity to a degree. But I was trying to play with trends that I felt would be acceptable to a population that wasn't super trend forward, given where they're at.
Like what?
Oh, well, I mean, it was really interesting. So when we took the cafe over, they called it an African soup.
As if there were a cuisine for the entire continent of Africa. And if there were, now let's talk cultural appropriation.
Absolutely. But people loved that soup. It was easily our most popular soup.
What the hell was it?
Oh, gosh. Now I'm trying to remember. I know that it had peanut butter in it. It had chickpeas. It had sweet potatoes, black beans, and I can't remember.
And people liked it.
Loved it. Loved. And that I wouldn't have ever, if you had asked me to put that on the menu, I would have said no way. People loved it. We couldn't take it off the menu and we couldn't change the name because people knew what it was. Now, I tried to introduce in the fall one year a pumpkin thyme soup, which was a very basic pumpkin soup with thyme. People refused to order it because they couldn't understand why I would mix thyme with pumpkin.
Because the only acceptable pumpkin spice is what you drink at Starbucks.
I guess, and so it would be the same thing with scones. I would offer a bacon cheddar scone and people would think it was insane I was putting bacon in a baked good, but then I could do a cardamom pistachio something baked good and they'd be fine with it. So it was very interesting beginning to understand how consumers kind of parse out what's on the menu and what appeals and what doesn't appeal.
Did you come away with any, is there a rule? Is there a law? Can you sum up what consumers want?
I wouldn't say so. I think for every restaurant, it depends on your position in the marketplace, how you are describing what your experience is going to be. It depends on the market that you're in. It depends on the consumers that you are currently attracting and want to attract. So, not to give the consultant answer, but it really does depend. There is no one rule for restaurants broadly, or even one segment of restaurants, or even one segment of restaurants in one city. It really is going to depend on so many factors. But that being said, it gives restaurants a huge amount of opportunity to innovate and do interesting things to stand out.
Yeah, I've heard from any number of chefs their frustration at having this great idea that ended up tasting great, but that consumers just wouldn't eat it.
Right. I think one challenge with chefs, and it's a great thing, but also it is a challenge, is that for chefs, they are creative. They are artists in what they do. Even an R&D chef working in a manufacturer is an artist. They're just focused on a different part of the art world, right? From a food point of view. But when a chef decides, I want to create this food because I think it is delicious and it might be, fundamentally delicious food. If they create that without thinking about the people who are going to be eating it, the people who are in the area that they're in, it's art created without a sense of who the customer is going to end up being. And so even the best art without a thought for who might see it and who might understand it and how you're going to communicate it is going to get lost in the shuffle, unfortunately. And so I think that very often restaurants are created without any thought for the solution that you're creating for the customers or the experience that you're creating for the customer. So I think that that's why, often great restaurants run into challenges.
You ended up in the data world, but you grew up as a food lover?
Yes and no. I grew up actually in New England, right? Which I would say sounds like a long time ago, but in the 70s and 80s, New England certainly was not a food forward area, excluding Boston and New York, right? So it was pretty basic food, but I loved great food. My mother was an amazing cook, or is an amazing cook. She was incredible. And so the food that we had was great, and it was handmade and it was fresh. And so I did love that. But I really didn't get into the idea of food as a profession until I was in my mid-20s.
And we'll be right back.
So I graduated college with the thought that I would go into acting and went to Manhattan and was in Manhattan, scraping it by, as all actors in Manhattan at least did.
And waiting tables, I guess?
I actually never did wait tables.
Oh my God.
I was a temp in offices. I was making a lot more money, a lot easier than the waiting the tables, to be honest with you. But I ended up dating a chef at the time who was so appalled by the fact that I was living on baked potatoes and yogurt, because that was what I could afford, that he started cooking meals for me. And that's when I really started getting more interested in a wider array of food. And living in Manhattan, obviously, you just eat out at a wider variety of restaurants. So when I decided that acting, much as I loved it, was not going to be paying the bills, it wasn't going to be my future, and decided to go back to get another degree, I ended up getting an MBA degree, but somebody who graduated from my program had gone to Technomic, which is a food research and consultants firm. And he came back to recruit. I was already kind of interested in food and thinking about whether that could be part of my career going forward. And so that's how I admittedly fell into the data wing of the food industry.
And it was while doing that you decided you should go to Le Cordon Bleu?
You know, I had started talking to my boss at the time at Technomic about doing that. And he admittedly told me, don't do it because you don't want to open a restaurant. But I kept thinking about it. And when I changed jobs, went from Technomic to Data Central, which is another data house focused on the food industry. At that point, I had more time and was living very close to the Le Cordon Bleu program in Chicago. And that's when I decided to go back and get a culinary degree.
But you never became a chef in a restaurant. Why not?
I think I realized how challenging it was. And honestly, my career in consulting was doing well. And I felt that getting that culinary degree was making me a better consultant. And so I decided that that was the path that I was going to go on. Although I loved running the kitchen at the café. Really, really love. I miss it in a lot of ways. I don't know if I could go back and do it again, but I really love doing it.
What does it take to be a successful chef?
Oh, wow.
I mean, I always hear you have to be a people pleaser. Is that true?
Well, I think it depends on if we're talking about a chef in a restaurant.
Yeah.
It depends on if that chef is the owner chef, sole owner chef, or if he's the creative driver of the restaurant, but not an owner. If you're talking about a chef who's the creative driver, then I don't think they need to be a people pleaser. I think they need to understand what's working and what's not working for their particular operation and the customers who are coming in, and being flexible enough to make changes as they go forward and as the restaurant evolves. If you're an owner, then I think you do, to a degree, need to be a people pleaser, but not about doing everything that people want, because that could then lead you astray from a brand strategy point of view and a market positioning point of view. If somebody walks in and wants a burger and you're a seafood restaurant, I don't think you should make them a burger, you know? So I think that you need to be true to what your vision is, but flexible enough that you evolve as you need to continue to be successful.
Well, you do a survey of consumers, I guess, every year.
Yeah, every year we put out a consumer needs report, because the way we look at it, I think personally that the food industry and food service in particular, to a degree, has gone a bit off the rails with food trends. I think the industry has focused on food trends as the end goal rather than a tool toward creating things that are meaningful for consumers.
Example.
Dubai chocolate is the most recent. Hot honey or Nashville hot are two other examples where those things became popular. Then every single operator, it seems, decided to jump on it and put it on anything just to say that they had it on the menu. And it became so ubiquitous and so pervasive that consumers now think it's a bit of a joke. And you can see that on social media, right? Hot honey is delicious. Nashville hot's delicious. Dubai chocolate can be delicious. But does it need to be on every single menu? No, it doesn't.
Well, but isn't that driven by social media in the first place?
I think that's a bit of a myth. I think that social media amplifies the interest in certain things, but that just because people become interested in Dubai chocolate on social media does not mean they need to see it on every single menu and on every single product on all the shelves in the grocery store.
And by the way, I was in Dubai years ago, didn't see any chocolate. For those who don't know, what the hell is Dubai chocolate?
So Dubai chocolate was started by a woman who has a chocolate shop. The bar itself became really popular on social media. It's a chocolate bar that is filled with deep fried phyllo dough and pistachio cream. And the reason it became so popular is that texturally, it looked so interesting. When you broke the bar open, you saw all these bits of deep fried phyllo dough and that bright green, creamy center. So it sounded amazing when you bit into it. It looked gorgeous. It had all the multisensorial elements that people were interested in. So that bar became very popular. But I think the problem now is that the food industry takes that and says, oh, great, this is popular. Let's put it on everything because that'll sell. But is that really the way we should be approaching food innovation? Do we need to take that one item and apply it to everything? And how is that undermining the relevance of the food industry, both retail and food service, for consumers because they're becoming bored so quickly when these things become so pervasive that you can't get away from them and they're on everything?
I don't like Nashville hot chicken. I think it's too hot.
A lot of people won't, but think of all the menus you've seen that on, and even menus that it shouldn't be on, like Italian menus.
Are consumers jumping on trends?
Well, when we've asked consumers their interest in trends, consumers at large and younger consumers specifically say that they are very interested in trends. But I think what you have to do is take a step back from that, and it's not trends per se. Right? It's not Hot Honey per se or Nashville Hot, not to, call those out. They're not the only ones.
Well, we can keep beating the hell out of them. I mean, what the heck?
But it's not those trends in particular. It's something new. Consumers want to see new things. They want to have new experiences. They want to get excited about things.
But wait, hold on. Americans have traditionally been pretty conservative in food choices. What new choices do they really want?
I would argue that Americans are not nearly as conservative with their food choices as they were 20 years ago when I got into consulting in food service. Younger consumers have a far broader comfort zone than any other generation that's ever been here. They're growing up with bibimbap and gochujang and sushi and, foods that when I was younger, you wouldn't even find it within a 3-state radius of where I was living, let alone willing to taste it, right? So I think that it's not true that all consumers, certainly, yes, there are consumers who are, but we're also a much more diverse population than we were 20 years ago, right? Across the board, not just major metro areas. So I think that we are a population that is more interested. And though we might be more conservative than other countries in food choices, I would also say, though, culturally, Americans have always been interested in the next new thing. What's the next new thing? What are we going to be doing that's different? How are we changing this up? Culturally, that has been, arguably maybe until more recently, that's been part of our DNA as a culture. And I think food-wise, because food has become so important as a touchstone over the last 20 years, that newness in food has become really important. But I think we have failed to be very new. It's really exacerbated since the pandemic, but we have been heading in this direction since before the pandemic and focusing on trends that are, to your point, maybe trending on social media that have shown any level of interest, and then jumping on that as though that trend is the solution. And the solution should be simply creating new things, being innovative, looking for different things. And innovation is a very optimistic endeavor, but I think we've lost that optimism since the pandemic. There is a greater sense of fear in failure and the outsized perception of what failure might mean, driven partially by social media and a whole host of other issues. And so we've lost that innovation in food. And I do think that it's going to create major problems. Consumers are going to turn to other industries for those new experiences if we don't start picking up innovation outside of trends.
Back in a moment.
Given the political situation in the country, and at least on the part of the government, a very anti-immigration, anti-immigrant stance, will this impact Americans turning to foods from other places?
I don't think so. Because there are a lot of immigrants who are here legally, right, or who have not been rounded up yet, sadly, who are running restaurants and are creating food companies. And whether they are using ingredients from outside the U.S., they are creating foods that are reflective of their culture. And so I think we will always have that element in the food industry. Now, will this stance on immigration negatively impact food production, our ability to grow our own food?
Or to cook it?
I was just going to say that.
At the James Beard Awards this year, immigration was the touchstone for most of the speeches.
The bottom line is we will not have a food industry because most Americans don't want to do the jobs that the immigrants are doing on the farms or in the kitchens. That is the bottom line. I've talked to some of my clients or commodity boards, and they work with different visas. And as part of that, they have to advertise those jobs to Americans before they accept the visa workers. And they don't get any Americans applying for those jobs. None. Over years and years and years. Americans aren't doing those jobs. They don't want to be dishwashers. They don't want to be line cooks. They don't want these jobs. It's unfortunate to a certain degree, but these are the individuals who are powering our industry. They are. And, we can argue whether them coming in illegally is the big problem or we should have created a path to citizenship. Certainly that needs to be part of the conversation, but the reality is our industry is not going to continue to function without them in the kitchens or in the fields.
Let's talk about the foods Americans are eating. What do we like? It used to be, look, there were the most restaurants in America were, I guess, Chinese restaurants, pizza places, Mexican. Is that still the top of the pyramid?
Yeah, I think those three are still the top of the pyramid, although for younger consumers, it used to be for older consumers that it would be Italian was the most popular, Chinese, and then Mexican. But now with younger consumers, that's flipped and it is Mexican, Chinese, Italian. But you've got Korean foods have surged over the last 10 years. And I don't have the numbers, but I would guess that they would be very close behind Chinese at this point, if they haven't actually overtaken Chinese.
Well, Korean has kind of become the new fine dining standard in New York, has it not?
Oh, I think that it is pervasive throughout the entire industry, from fine dining through to food trucks. You see Korean foods and Korean influences across everything in the food industry, including in retail, whether it's the sauces that are coming out of Korea or the dishes or other elements or techniques, Korean food. But this is also, you had asked about the consumer survey work we do. We take a huge step back at Menu Matters and we look at what fundamental consumer needs are rather than the trends, because it's those fundamental consumer needs we need to start addressing. And when you look at trends that are happening outside of the food industry, Korean beauty products have been surging for the last 15 years. Korean music, fashion, that's been surging. So it makes perfect sense that Korean food is also becoming a fundamental element in our domestic food scene.
Are there other cuisines that are taken off or poised to take off?
Now, obviously, this is not one cuisine. It's a region of cuisines, but Middle Eastern cuisines, absolutely. In fact, the last time we were at the Summer Fancy Food Show, there were more Middle Eastern products being introduced than Korean for the first time that I remember in the last few years. So I think Middle Eastern, and again, the region, there is no Middle Eastern cuisine, but all those cuisines, I think they are going to become the most influential cuisines over the next few years and may overtake Korean as an influence area in the next 10 years.
Well, most people, you say Middle Eastern cuisine, people think, okay, hummus, tabbouleh. Mm-hmm. What are we talking about here?
Well, we are. Hummus was certainly what I'd call a pioneer ingredient, although I would say that hummus started more with the Mediterranean trends, right? Because obviously a lot of those elements are not just in the Middle East. They have, are North Africa and Mediterranean. But we've seen a lot of Lebna is certainly growing.
The yogurt.
Yep. You've got even the Dubai chocolate, right? That is not necessarily the most traditional, but the pistachio influence.
I never found it in Dubai, but I haven't been there in a long time. So
there you go. I think that was introduced, 3 or 4 years ago, I think is when that actually came out. But pistachios are very common there. You've got all of the botanicals, orange blossom, roses. A lot of that has become very influential. Lamb is becoming far more common in this country than it ever used to be.
Lamb raised here?
No, most of the lamb that's actually sold in the U.S. is Australian lamb. The U.S. does not produce enough lamb domestically to even service the domestic market, even though we are, from a per person consumption, among the lowest in the world. Yeah. So most of it's from Australia.
I made rack of lamb from Costco last night. It comes from New Zealand. It's terrific.
Yeah.
Is lamb tariff impacted?
No, not as much. To a degree it is, but not as much as other categories.
Lamb's like a controversial, there are people who hate lamb. Is it really coming up the leaderboard here?
It is, actually. It's been growing both at retail and at food service over the last few years. And during the pandemic, it became a bit of a bigger thing because it was more commonly available than other products that were facing supply issues. So consumers started trying it more often. You've got more Middle Eastern, Mediterranean restaurants that are featuring lamb on their menus. So I think consumers have been exposed to it more. I do think the issue with lamb is that historically it's been dicey at restaurants. Some restaurants do it beautifully. Other restaurants don't. And so you can have a bad lamb experience.
And nobody wants a bad lamb experience.
Nobody wants a bad lamb experience. No. And I think that, it does have a stronger flavor than Americans are used to because our beef does not have a very strong flavor, our conventional beef. So I think it's stronger flavored, but I think consumers are becoming more used to stronger flavors with bitter flavors and sour flavors. So yeah, I think lamb's going to do well.
Which brings us to beef, which is now at record price levels. I don't know, is lamb cheaper?
Lamb, I believe right right now is still cheaper than beef. It's more expensive than it was, certainly.
So are chicken wings. I mean, people start eating something, the price goes up.
Right, exactly. But it is cheaper than beef because our domestic beef production is in a real shortage issue.
And why is that?
I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I do know that there have been droughts that have impacted the cattle numbers, that there have been some other issues that have also impacted the amount of cattle. But we are definitely at the lowest level of cattle production that we've been in, and it's probably going to take about 10 years for us to get back up and running.
Well, will we? I mean, the fact is there's been a concerted effort across various constituencies to convince us that red meat's bad for us and bad for the environment. Are we still a beef-loving culture?
Yes. We are. Yes. In fact, beef consumption since the pandemic has continued to rise. Now, the increased prices recently have certainly impacted beef sales and beef consumption, but we continue to eat more beef in the face of plant-based and plant-forward movement. But I think what you've seen, though, are consumers more interested in weaving plants more into their diet without giving up beef. But yeah, we have not given up beef. We're definitely nowhere close to becoming a plant-forward nation.
Well, my perception, and maybe this is unfair, is that an awful lot of the we're going to eat plants is BS.
Oh, yeah. I mean, whenever you survey consumers and you ask them a lot of these questions, especially healthy eating related questions, they are very aspirational in the way that they answer these questions. So a lot of them will say that they're doing a certain thing, but they're really not. I do think consumers are more conscious of trying to balance out, and I think this is particularly true with younger consumers, balancing out what they're eating, trying to feel a little bit better about eating healthy over here and then indulging over here, but not trying to give up anything that they really love. So I do think that they're eating more plants, but they're not giving up animal proteins.
Well, how does that, okay, you talk about they're operating on two tracks. They want to be indulgent. They want to be healthy. Mm-hmm. They want some more plants, but they don't want to give up. How the hell, as a restaurant owner, do you make a menu?
Well, I think a restaurant needs to decide what their purpose is. Why are they creating a restaurant? I think the problem is that a lot of restaurants do try to be a restaurant that will offer everything to everyone so that they have the widest possible base. But by doing that, you're nothing to anyone. So I think restaurants have to decide, this is what we are. We are a fried chicken restaurant. We are going to give you the best fried chicken that you will ever have. We're going to have a small menu, but everything we execute is going to be perfect. So every time you come to us, it's going to be an amazing experience.
But can I afford to make everything perfect?
If you have a small enough menu, the minute you start expanding your menu to the point where you've got 80% of your customers ordering 10 items and 30 items on your menu are ordered like very rarely, you're not going to do those well. It's impossible. You'll have no experience doing them. Your line cooks, your chef just simply won't do them very often. So I think smaller menus, more concentrated on where your skill set is, that's where restaurants will shine.
And what are GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic doing to restaurant menus?
So there's a lot of debate on that in the industry. You certainly have people who are arguing that they are having an enormous effect and restaurants have to start shrinking portions and eliminating different types of categories. Personally, I think they're something to watch, but right now we have 10% of the population on these drugs. That means 90% of the population is not. And they have a very high abandonment rate at the moment, as well as a whole host of other issues, right, that are limiting their impact. So you have a share of consumers, just like you have a share of consumers who are gluten-free, who are on keto, who are on all sorts of other...
But I think this gluten-free thing is crap.
Well, I mean...
Is it?
You've got legitimately a group of people who are celiac.
Yeah, that's 11 people.
It's 1% to 2%. The vast majority of other people who are gluten-free, personally, I don't think that it's really something that's going to make a big deal for people, but you've got consumers who would argue that it's made a huge difference in their health and wellness, and, God bless them. If you want to eat that way, you want to eat that way.
Which raises a question. So I'm a chef. I have a great local restaurant. And my server comes back with, this one wants this on the side, this one wants this replaced, this one can't eat peanuts. At some point, don't you just have to say, go home and eat?
I think that any restaurant needs to be very clear about their allergens because there are allergens that are very dangerous. Gluten is not one of those. Peanuts and shellfish absolutely are. So if you have them, even in the house, you need to be very clear about what is safe for these consumers and what's not. But if you're talking about hyper-personalization, I want this sauce, not that sauce, I want this, not that, I want it prepared this way and not that way, I think every restaurant needs to decide to what degree they are comfortable with with and can effectively deal with customization, I think they need to decide what they're able to do and what they're not, and then be very clear about that at the get-go. There are some consumers who will want to micromanage the entire process. And yeah, you have to be comfortable saying, we're just not that kind of restaurant. If you don't want to be that kind of restaurant, don't be that kind of restaurant.
I can think of no harder way to make a living than running a restaurant.
Agreed. Yes.
Why do people do it?
I think it's love of the industry. Even now, even when we shut down the cafe, and many of my friends and colleagues are chefs at various locations, they asked me if we were planning on reopening it. And at the time, we weren't sure if we were going to. And every single one of them said, don't do it. Don't reopen it.
But they're not closing their places.
They're not. But I think it's one of those things where they love what they do. I don't want to say they love the misery, but they love what they do, but they know that it's impossible and they're very frustrated. I think even chefs who love what they're doing are very frustrated about the current situation. They're frustrated about labor. They're frustrated about administrations across the country as well as federally that are making things more challenging.
Like what? How are you unfairly legislating?
I'm not saying unfairly, but it is challenging, right? When you raise minimum wages to $20 and $30 an hour, which I understand the reason why politicians and consumers want that, but that means you are going to have to raise menu prices. And consumers will support raising minimum wage, understandably, but then when a restaurant has to raise their menu prices to support minimum wage and the need to offer healthcare and tariffs and all of these other things that are being administrative and are completely out of their control, consumers push back. We saw it with McDonald's and Taco Bell when they tried to raise their prices. We've seen it across the country.
Did they lose customers?
Oh, absolutely. Because they've had to raise their menu prices for years. They were in a hole with these value menus. And then the pandemic hit and all of the issues after that, they had to raise the prices and people pushed back. People were outraged.
And now they're back to value menus.
That is correct. But what's happened now is they have both acknowledged to their customers that their food wasn't worth the prices they were raising it to, and they've created a deeper hole for themselves that they will not be able to get out of, because by the time they absolutely have to raise their menu prices because they have no other option at that point, nobody's going to want to pay them.
Well, I was talking to Bobby Stuckey, who owns Frasca, which won the James Beard Award as America's Outstanding Restaurant 2025. He was telling me people just don't want to pay what they need to pay for food. And he said, look, my wife works in women's fashion. She sells these designer shoes for $1 gazillion. I asked her, do you get price resistance? And she said, no, I sell several pairs a day. He said, if I raise the price of chicken by $4, there's a mutiny.
Right.
This is a conundrum that seems to have no answer. I mean, people want to eat out, but if they don't want to pay what it costs, then they're not going to eat out, then restaurants are going to close.
That's exactly right. That is exactly at the heart of the biggest challenge that our food industry has in this country. People do not understand what it takes to bring food to the table. I've gone on many farm tours. I've gone on plant tours. If people understood the amount of effort that it takes to grow a head of lettuce, that it takes to produce any product that you see on a grocery shelf, the fact that our food is as cheap as it is to begin with is almost a miracle. To think that a burger, for all the elements that are in a hamburger, should legitimately cost $2 or $3 or $4 is ludicrous. It's ludicrous. There's no way any one of those elements in the burger should cost that little, let alone the entire burger and the labor that goes into actually pulling that burger together. So we have an enormous consumer education issue in this country that will plague restaurants for the near term.
Which takes me to consumer behavior and something I saw on your website. Mm-hmm. Weird consumer preferences.
Okay.
According to your website, your survey showed consumers eat the weirdest things, like straight butter.
Yeah. We like to ask unusual questions of consumers. Like we were talking about the aspirational responses, we try to ask questions that they won't be trying to answer correctly because they are weird questions. So they won't think that there's a right answer. So one question we wanted to get at was to understand the textural and multisensory desires of consumers. What are some of those weird foods? Consumers will eat, straight butter for sure. They will eat cold pizza.
Well, hold on. Cold pizza is a cuisine of its own, so don't go there.
I mean, to a certain number of us, cold pizza, there is nothing wrong with cold pizza.
Yeah, but like you got cold hot dogs?
Sure.
In your survey?
Right out of the refrigerator. Yep. Just grab them and eat them. I mean, I know people who eat raw meat from the grocery store. Like they pick at ground meat from the grocery store. It's not tartare, it's just ground meat. So consumers have their weird little things. As long as you're not getting sick and you're not making anybody else sick, then eat whatever you'd like to eat, I guess.
You got any positive news looking forward? For the restaurant industry is just going through hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any optimism for either the industry or for the people who like to eat in restaurants?
I do think you have a lot of restaurateurs and those who are currently operating and those who are considering operating, who are, I think, finally thinking, and I know this term is wildly overused, but outside the box. They are thinking about what else can a restaurant be? What is the next iteration of restaurants? What is the new restaurant, right? Not just for kitsch sake and not just to create some new experience, but to be able to deal with these issues that we're dealing with, increased costs, labor constrictions, lack of skilled labor, and all of the other issues, cost of real estate and whatnot. And so you have some very creative people, I think, in the next few years are going to be opening some really unique restaurants that will manage costs, but also provide consistently good products and hopefully will be very focused on hospitality. One thing that our industry needs to get back to, and I do think you see it, Starbucks, the new CEO and some of the changes they're making, they've certainly put this at the forefront, which I think is smart, is more hospitality. The restaurant industry for a nation of people who have lost the ability to connect with each other, who are feeling more isolated and alone and stressed and all the things, the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry can be that connection point. You might only connect with the server at a drive-through window, but the impact that individual could have if they offer the right hospitality could be more meaningful than every other connection you have in a day. So I think our industry can provide that human connection lifeline to American consumers. I think we need it as a country. And I think our industry, more than any other industry, is the industry that can provide it. And I think you've got people who are waking up to that and are putting that at the forefront of their innovation.
And to consumers, my advice would be find a place you like and become a regular.
Yes.
It's really nice when you walk in and they say, hey, it's good to see you again.
Yes. Find those restaurants that are meaningful to you, that are doing a great job, that are really doing good work and meet your needs, but also reflect your values, and definitely frequent them as often as you can to support them.
Maeve, it's a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you so much for joining me.
I love this. Anytime you'd like to have me on, I'd love to be here.
I will do that.
All right.
Maeve Webster on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. I'll see you next time. And check out the Culinary Characters Unlocked Substack.